took care of our communities. We registered to vote. We voted. We elected the first African-American vice president. Women emerged as fighters and leaders of the working class. And our panel represents women from across those struggles. So let's start with Erica Smiley. Smiley, the economic crisis that was sparked by the pandemic has been called a she-cession as opposed to a recession. Women have lost about 5.5 million jobs. Men lost 4.5 million. In the month of December alone, 154,000 Black women dropped out of the labor force. Why were women so disproportionately impacted, especially women of color? So Smiley, you're the executive director of Jobs with Justice. You've worked through Jobs with Justice for 15 years with labor and social justice organizations. Do you see signs that women are up for this challenge, and what's it going to take to fight this?
Hey, Bobby. Yeah, women have, well, first of all, good evening. I don't know what time it is there, but it's so good to see you and everyone else. It's been a long time and just really honored to be a part of the discussion tonight. Yeah, I think women have long been up for the challenge. I think the question is our government up to the challenge to build out the infrastructure that would support women in re-entering the workforce? I think we can go into all kinds of statistical analysis as to why this is disproportionately impacted women, particularly women in low-wage sectors, which do tend to be mostly women of color, particularly Black and migrant women. And we can just, without going through the perfect facts, we can just tick some of the boxes here. So first, school's out, and there's very limited childcare due to the pandemic. And women tend to be the ones who are taking care of their families, let alone taking care of their elders sometimes in the home as well. And so a lot of women with that already on the as a burden had to drop out of the workforce. And in some instances, like the only thing keeping many families on is some of the eviction moratoriums and other things. So let's just tick that second box, because there's a great article in the Washington Post magazine, The Lily, about how the evictions were already disproportionately impacting women, low-income women, and again, primarily Black women in the district at least. And so, we have these like compounding crises that we haven't. It's going to take us a while to understand the full extent of what this means for most families, let alone the women who are leading them. But I think there are some very specific steps that the administration can take that, and certainly some governors as well, that can take that would support women coming back into the workforce. And the biggest one that I find most exciting, given Jobs with Justice's role in the Caring Across Generations campaign historically, is the care infrastructure and funding for care infrastructure. You think about bridges and roads and tunnels, getting people to and from work. But the thing that actually keeps many of us at work is actually having care support, child care, elder care, long-term care, things that allow us to, make sure our loved ones are taken care of, not to be punny, while also being able to get back into the workforce. So those are a couple of things. I think there's some micro things as well, and because I don't want to let corporations off the hook in this initial conversation. I know there'll be more bites of the apple, so I'll get to it in more detail. But one in particular is that we're beginning to see a new rise or a new uptick in campaigns for predictable scheduling, like in Massachusetts, for example, because again, so you have this situation, you're hanging on by a thread. You really need predictability for your hours so that you can be home to manage the very unusual circumstances of your family. And including, speaking of unusual circumstances, you can hear my 2-year-old screaming in the background. So I'll go back on mute, but I just want to say there are a couple of like very basic things that can happen at many levels of society, from corporate accountability, collective bargaining, all the way up to federal programs that can get us all back to work.
Great.
Oh, Bobby, I think you're on mute.
Biden's infrastructure proposal broadens the idea of infrastructure to include caregiving. And I looked up infrastructure. It means organized structure needed for the operation of a society. So that does, apply to caregiving. And it sure corresponds to that initiative that Jobs with Justice helped launch caregiving across generations. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how the concept of caregiving as a respected job needs to be changed, you know, from something that's a, sort of a biological function of women into a job, you know, that has respect and conditions, and that the female, you know, that a predominantly female workforce does it.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, and this is, you know, I know we as Jobs with Justice helped to launch the Caring Across Generations campaign with the National Domestic Worker Alliance to really add dignity back to care. But this is not a new concept. I mean, I actually just finished reading Danielle Cunningham. I'm going to mess up her last name. Her basically it's called Putting Our Hands on It or something like that. And it's about domestic worker organizing all the way back pre-Civil War, particularly among Black women and Irish women, and some of the intersections there. And even then, we were dealing with issues of dignifying the profession and the occupation of caregiving, which is takes up a huge ton of time, and it's like unseen labor for many, particularly women in this country. And so there are some really basic things that we can do. I mean, first of all, we can treat it like it is an actual job. So certain legislation under this Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, the PRO Act, are all trying to make some fixes towards identifying care work as something that can be protected by labor protections. That's step one. And then making sure that it's incorporated into other questions as we define the wages or the prevailing wages of care work and domestic work, whether it's in a facility or in the home. Another thing that I think is really key, which maybe could use a little more work in terms of the current proposals, is acknowledging family care, which is maybe not necessarily what someone is filling out a W-9 for, but is still significant work, and what is the way that we as a society can compensate people who are really leaning into that. In that sense, there may be some women who re-enter the workforce, but as care workers or as half care workers, half, you know, manufacturing or whatever they end up wanting to do, because they could potentially be compensated for that work by the state, at the federal, state, or local level. So those are some of the proposals that we've been thinking about and really trying to advocate for, because at the end of the day, there is value in work. People want to work, and they want to be seen for the work that they do, whether it's putting a automobile together or attending to a relative who lives in their home. So there is something about really seeing and visibilizing care work.
Well, congratulations to Jobs with Justice for seeing that. And I know that this didn't get into this agenda by accident. It took the understanding of the importance of care work.
Absolutely, thank you.
Laid for quite a while. So I want to move on now to Carmella. Carmella, you're a banquet server at the JW Marriott in Chicago's financial district. I know you get to meet a lot of the Chicago sports teams on your job. One of the perks. But seriously, hospitality is one of the hardest hit industries in the nation. I wonder if you could tell what happened to your union, Unite Here Local 1, and your workforce.
Hi, everybody. I am Carmella, and our industry, our union, Unite Here Local 1, represents hospitality workers. That's hotels, restaurants, sports venues, and casinos. And so when the pandemic hit, it rocked us. Like, we were the first group of people out, and we'll probably be the last people to come back to work. It was really, really scary because we were exposed a lot to, overly exposed, I believe, to COVID. And so we had no idea what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. Everybody just, threw their names in the hat and got busy to try to assist the members. And so we do everything in our membership assistance program. We help the members get enrolled for unemployment, SNAP benefits, which is public aid, or the link card to get food, utilities assistance. We help them enroll in grants. We help them to try to get forbearances on their mortgages, letters to landlords, anything you can think of, we do it. I have literally switched from being a banquet server to a case management social worker.
So how have you noticed, how has this struggle changed the workers that you work with? You're a steward, you're a shop steward, right?
Yeah.
But how have people grown to meet this challenge?
Wow, it is challenging. A challenge is a very light word for it. The shop stewards have assisted the members in their hotels and organized the members. There's one key leader and shop steward, Latanya Marshall, at the Blackstone Hotel. Immediately, she started assisting her co-worker. She's a housekeeper there too. She started assisting her her co-workers and helping them to get utility help them enroll with unemployment, and just the most important thing, I can't miss this, we've all been a support for one another. Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to, you know, and that's really important, and it's important for the mental health. So I cannot leave that out. Sometimes when I'm calling to members and they answer the phone, they're just glad to hear your voice on the other end. So the support is very, very, very much needed and appreciated on the other end.
So besides the member assistance work, your union was quite active in the election campaign. How have you tied that in with the pandemic response?
Oh my God. Well, I myself, I did, I think 20 shifts of phone banking. And so that was my first time ever doing phone banking. And I was happy to participate because I had one goal in mind. That guy, whatever his name is, number 45, he had to leave. He had to get out of there. And I was going to do everything within my power. And so is my union. And our union put people on the ground in Florida, Arizona, and Philadelphia to, knock on doors and get people registered and get them out to the polls. And so that was the first half of getting number 45 out of there. And then when it came to the Georgia election, which was just as important as getting number 45 out of there, we sent people down to Georgia too, to door knock and phone banking and everything. And I'm really grateful for my union for that, because I don't know if we could be blue right now if it wasn't for our union. I do wonder about that sometimes, but we've seen the hard work pay off for everybody, for the members sacrificing their time and leaving their families to go door knock and phone bank and get people to the polls.
So besides the election work and the member assistance work, are you all helping the non-union workers who haven't had a chance to be unionized in Chicago in this pandemic? What are their issues?
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the non-union hotels have terminated their staff, and they have had members there for 25 years or more. And that's unbelievable that they would terminate them during a pandemic. It wasn't their fault. And they do have the right to come back to work. I believe they have the right to come back to work. The company doesn't have the right to terminate them during a pandemic for no reason, just for no reason. They've been terminated. So our union is helping them to campaign against these hotels. And our union has also gone to the Mayor Lori Lightfoot, to try to get it passed that when the guests come back, we come back to work.
Well,
so that
union people didn't have that issue because of your recent strike. What happened there?
Yes, in September of 2018, our president, Karen Kent, took us out on strike because our contracts had expired. The hotels let our contract expire. And we went on strike for several reasons. The two most important reasons were healthcare and job security. And what I mean by job security, to have recall rights. And that
really paid off, didn't it?
It did really pay off, because we had no idea in September of 2018 that a pandemic was coming.
Yeah.
You know, and we needed that health insurance more than anything. And just the nerve of them, you want to take away healthcare? You want to take away our healthcare? No, we got out there, we fought, and we kept our healthcare, and we got our job security.
All right.
And so that really, 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 that is a lesson taught for all the people who weren't so sure. That's the real lesson. Stick with your union. Your union's going to stick with you. You got to just come out and just be in solidarity.
So I'm going to move on now to another food service worker, and that's Hailey Carrera. Hailey's from Phoenix, Arizona, and just a little over a year ago, Hailey was working 2 jobs. She was both one job as a bartender and one job as a server, and she was fired from both jobs or terminated at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think maybe Hailey could share with us what her journey was from that, what led her into activism and some of the things she's been doing this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmella, that was extremely informative, and you're fighting the good fight. That's incredible, and thank you for having me. Yes, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working about 65 hours a week between 2 jobs, nights and weekends bartending, and weekdays serving. And it was go, 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 go. And then I was furloughed, and then there was nothing. And then there was no certainty. There was no light at the end of the tunnel, because we really didn't know. And then, election coming up too, we really didn't know what the future had in store for, us collectively as, humans, and then workers especially, and service workers. Arizona then did open up way too soon. And I returned to work as a server, and the paranoia of what am I going to bring home? What individual not wearing a mask is going to infect me with this deadly pandemic. And it did not feel safe. And so then I saw the need, and I saw the struggle, and an organization came along, and that was fighting for the $15 minimum wage. And with that comes the PRO Act and ending the filibuster. And we're the state that everyone has their eyes on to do these, to get these legislative moves passed, so that folks can have security and be able to go back to work, and not have to be concerned. And even with vaccines, it's still not a guarantee. So I kind of went off on a tangent there.
You got involved with phone banking, even to other people from your industry, I understand. You got involved with mutual aid. Could you tell us how that worked?
Absolutely. Yeah. So after I was furloughed and I was looking for at-home work, started phone banking for an organization that was, fighting to raise the minimum wage. And that kind of got my foot in the door into activism, more in-person activism, and being more active. I have since left this organization, and now I am much more involved in mutual aid as the need in the Arizona summer and in the Arizona heat grows, to keep our unsheltered friends safe, alive, happy, as happy as you can be under the circumstances, fed, clothed, etc. and then something like 40% of unsheltered folks have jobs. So the folks that we're fighting for in the labor movement are going to work, and then they don't have a roof over their head or a bed to sleep in after a long day of working. So that's kind of where the intersectionality.
At one point, you were phone banking other restaurant workers about their wage conditions. What action were you able to take even in the midst of the pandemic?
Of course, those who were able to and willing to step outside their home and be around strangers, I was able to organize actions in front of Cinema's office and make the
Senator Sinema.
I'm sorry, Senator Kirsten Sinema's office, and have our voices heard and have our demands heard. Of this is not anything that we can wait any longer for. We need this now. This will be the single biggest push for the economy. If you think of it from a flourish mentality kind of perspective, there are several studies that I'm not even going to try to quote because I don't want to misquote, but yes,
So what were you demanding from the senator?
Yeah, absolutely. That initially it was that she vote yes on including the Raise the Wage Act for all workers, so $15 plus tips on top for all workers in the American Rescue Plan. Then when that was no longer when that was, her notorious thumbs down, and that happened and it became a standalone bill, then it was once again calling on Senator Sinema to vote progressively and vote in favor of raising the subminimum wage and the minimum wage for all workers.
Well, thanks, Hailey, for sharing all of those interesting experiences in Arizona. I'm sure there'll be more to tell. So I'd like to move on to Carol. Carol Rosenblatt, you worked as the executive director for nearly 20 years for the Coalition of Labor Union Women. I know that's an organization that brings together women leaders and rank and filers in the union movement. 10 years ago, you wrote in a Miss Magazine piece that the '1 issue for CLUE is jobs, but jobs at union wages and benefits, and focused on industries where women predominate, like government and healthcare. So I wanted to turn to healthcare. During the pandemic, healthcare workers have been considered essential, whether they're RNs or nursing home staff. But could you share how the pandemic impacted this group? What are these workers doing, and what are their unions doing to protect them?
Yes, thank you, Roberta, and thank the other panelists. And I appreciate being here and having the opportunity to talk to everyone who's listening in. So I think that everyone, as the pandemic, moved ahead, recognized what was happening to essential workers such as health workers, regardless of what particular position they held. And this was obvious if people looked at the news or on social media, that it was horrific. Workers did not have, basic training. We were unprepared as a country to deal with this epidemic. And in spite of what was being communicated publicly by our then president that everything was fine, we knew that it was traumatic. So on a daily basis, healthcare workers ended up working, enormously long shifts. Many of them had no PPE and were wearing things like trash bags for protection. In the beginning, those reports from New York were just heartrending in terms of not having hospital space and the number of people that were dying and not having a place to go in terms of being, buried in a timely manner. So unions, because they are unions, were able to demand health and safety measures that those hospitals that were not organized were not able to. Even other kinds of workers that had contact with employees, like supermarket workers who were unionized, also had the ability to demand certain health and safety precautions.
Carol, did you see any specific examples of where people took workplace actions in these regards? But by the way, let me just interrupt to say, folks, if you want to ask questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A or the chat to put your questions up there. Yeah, so I was wondering if you had run into any specific examples of how people, specifically women healthcare workers, fought for PPE.
Well, I think that a number of them were very vocal, both in terms of speaking out on social media and making it very clear that PPE was not available, and that the workforce was really traumatized. I think some of this is obvious based on a recent article. It was really an expose in the Washington Post, where 3 out of 10 healthcare workers are now considering whether they're going to remain in their profession, which is horrible, but understandable because of the workplace violations and the mental health stress that they were put under during that period of time, without having commensurate support by the Trump administration, who we know was not promoting mask wearing and not promoting social distancing. And that had a lot to do with how a lot of the healthcare workers felt so beleaguered and unappreciated by the community. That was a whole different situation, where we know that community activists initiated music and gift giving and pot kind of, smashing so that there was noise in support of healthcare workers. But the administration clearly was not supportive.
So we know that the equal pay has been a priority since CLU's inception, and it's, of course, an important goal of both the women and the labor community. Could you give us an update on the status of that and how it impacts Black and Latina women in particular?
Yes, this has been an issue for CLU since our inception in 1974. And I wish I could say that it's been resolved, which it should have been, but it hasn't. So every year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with the information on salaries. It's September of 1920 gives us information for the previous year. So we know that this year, the average amount that all women earned in comparison to all white, non-Hispanic men in all occupations was 82 cents per dollar. That's on average for everyone. but it's much worse for women of color, with 63 cents for Black women, 60 cents for Native American women, 55 cents for Latinas, and 85 cents for Asian and Pacific Islanders, but that's not a real fair analysis because there's so many different groups in that Asian and Pacific Islanders that there are some, for example, in the Pacific Island that earn even less than the Latinas. So that had a serious impact on women who were already beleaguered during the pandemic, earning even less. And, I think we need to say that even before the pandemic hit, women were, so many women and children were already living in poverty. In 2018, I think about 24 million women were living in poverty and 11 million children under 18. So,
yeah, I think it's really, there's a lot of to chew on there, the barriers and obstacles that women are working on. I want to remind folks that you can ask your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So my part of this agenda my time is up. I'm going to hand the mic over now to Brandy. Brandy's going to moderate. Brandy, our moderator from Arizona, an artist. I would like to turn the mic over to her, and she will moderate the questions and answers to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, everyone. I'd like to start with asking the speakers to think about, no pressure, throwing up in the chat a link to, well, for Smiley, how the caregiving across generations, jobs with justice, how to connect with that, or if anyone knows. Carmella, just to get it started, because we just have 2 questions right now, please throw your questions up. Carmella, where people in Chicago could find these emotional support systems, or just throw up the Unite Here link, or maybe at the end, or maybe we have it so we could throw it up. Hailey, the mutual aid stuff, I'm curious how to get connected with that in Phoenix. And Carol, of course, you have all the connections with healthcare workers, where they could maybe get help getting connected with their local union. So Jeremy and Anonymous are asking about the PRO Act. That's very general. Does anyone want to mention anything about the PRO Act? Carol?
Yeah, and I can go after Carol. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so interestingly, during the last year, the polls have indicated that the population in the United States is more positively kind of attuned to unionization, with 65% of the general population being interested, 67% of women, and 70% of people of color. So that's very significant. And under the National Labor Relations Act, which historically, oversees issues of unionization, violations by corporate America have been to a large extent ignored, as we saw in the recent effort at Amazon in Alabama, where people, those that were interested, were harassed and just, threatened with disciplinary action and on and on. So the PRO Act would free up the ability of workers to unionize in a non-threatening environment. And for women, typically they benefit greatly by being unionized with an average of about $224 more they earn if they are a union member than if they're not, as well as having quite a bit of benefits like health care and other kinds of leave. So I'll stop and turn it over to Smiley, who I know Jobs with Justice has been organizing around this since I get your action alerts.
Well, that's great. You know, Carol said the bulk of what I think the PRO Act would do, and I think the only addition that I wanted to make was that, you know, this is one particular fix that would support some of the gaps that Carol alluded to in the private sector. So really making it less costly, or making it more costly for corporations and employers who violate workers' rights, and making it faster and easier to get access to names so that we can organize. It really provides some significant needed fixes. But there are some other bills that you all should be looking at as well. Just kind of see these things as a package. So there's, you know, the Public Service Freedom of Association Act, which has similar fixes specific to public sector workers, which is, as a Southerner, in many places, you know, is still very difficult to organize and collectively bargain at that level. And then there are some fixes for essential workers more broadly that include some adjustments that have historically kept migrant workers from being able to organize and collectively bargain, such as the Power Act, which is, you know, trying to get included in reconciliation, which would fix the Hoffman-Placet case, which would allow undocumented workers access to protections, which they currently don't have access to because of that case. And then there's also, because of this new framework of workers being essential, we've always known that workers held up the economy, but because of this new framework of essential sectors that has come out through pandemic, it's more popularized, and we've been trying to use that to leverage the set of standards for workers beyond what we've been able to do in the past. In the past, these folks were just considered low-wage workers, whatever, excluded workers, and now they're seen very clearly as their role in the economy from a position of power as essential workers. And so one of the things that's very exciting coming out of the Congress from Texas, and of course, you know, we'll see how far it goes, is this idea of creating a pathway to citizenship for essential workers, which would impact a huge number of undocumented workers, so upwards of 5 million workers who, because of their role in the economy, could potentially access citizenship and then again be included under the National Labor Relations Act. So just want to see these things as a package and not just as you know, workers' rights bills here and there, but actually as a package that are ultimately trying to expand our ability to participate in decision making and in governing. And thus, instead of just being kind of the siloed worker bills, I actually want us to see them as bills that we are pushing in order to expand democracy, just like we would with HR 1 and the Voting Rights Act, because that's ultimately what they're all trying to do.
Thank you. Okay, and we have Anita Waters with To Carol or Smiley. We're on a roll with these gals, guys. And in these days of the pandemic and the state of the economy. Oh, sorry, I have to go back and guys, bear with me. I have not done the chat moderation, but I hope I'm doing an okay job so far. From Anita, that was early. And question is, in these days of demand-based scheduling, have workers anywhere gained control over their schedules?
Yeah, and then actually I'd be interested in Carmella also answering this, because I feel like where we have union density and representation, we've been able to negotiate over those things. So I won't speak to that. I will say that in some places, workers who haven't been able to organize a union yet were able to pass legislation giving them access to hours and predictability. And this is, you know, a few years ago, there was kind of a wave across the country of this happening, particularly at the municipal level. And, you know, the key thing is enforcement. And in some places where we have strategic co-enforcement like in the Bay Area, that, we've been able to actually build on that and actually, make sure that workers have predictability. But in other places, like in Massachusetts, which I mentioned earlier, less so. So that's definitely something that workers have been thinking about. The other thing, which, we often hear employers say, oh, it's too hard, it's too difficult. One of the inventions or interventions that came out of that wave back in 2014, 2015, 2016 was the companies that actually made the scheduling software saying, actually, it isn't that hard. We can just make a couple tweaks if that's what you want. They just want to sell their software. So we're able to kind of take that argument away and make it very difficult. But a really important issue as scheduling is really the other side of the coin from wages. You can't raise wages and then cut our hours. You have to actually see those things together.
Absolutely. And you're right, Smiley. It's not that difficult to come up with a schedule and a set schedule in a timely, respectful manner so people can plan their lives and, how to schedule things with their family and their children. And I work banquets, and that's a forever changing wheel. And, you got 100 events here and 20 servers. So it's not that difficult. That was something that we did negotiate on, and the managers or the companies have to just sit down, organize their stuff, and get it together. It's as simple as that. It's not that difficult. And I believe our Mayor Lori Lightfoot, had an ordinance that the companies had to have a schedule a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance for their employees, so that nobody's left, hanging on the string, and people need to plan for their families and their children. And so that was definitely the right thing to do. And with that in mind, Mayor Lori Lightfoot needs to just tie that in with the city ordinance to get everybody to come back to work, since you believe and you pass that people can come on back to work.
Okay. There was also a question about hazard pay, so that I should have probably put those together. Would those be the same avenues to fight for hazard pay, from Timothy? He's also asking about Bessemer, Alabama, now that, like, where do we go from here type thing. But I know, does anyone want to field? I'm sorry, I put those together.
It's okay.
I'm more interested in
start in,
where do we go from here with Bessemer? Because hazard pay, go ahead.
I don't want to dominate, but these two have some very quick answers, and then I'm sure Carol and others know as well. So with the Amazon workers, the fight is still happening. I think for any good Southerner, particularly at a predominantly Black work site, these things take a long time by design, because they're trying to keep the most militant base of the labor movement from organizing. It took 16 years at Smithfield. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's what's happening. However, these workers, in all of their courage, are not only, it looks like they lost worse than they did, but this is because the company tried to throw in at the last minute over 1,000 names to be in the unit who had to vote, which was really messed up. And I just put a link in the chat from Reuters because, there's enough evidence at this point where, I'm not expecting it to be overturned, but the fact that it's now being discussed as a bum election. So this is like, solidarity has to continue for workers in Bessemer. This fight is not over, and the union has set up camp. Like, the union is there. They're going to be there and trying to support wins, even if they don't have full recognition at this time. And then on the question of premium hazard pay, this is really important, because with the money that the Biden administration has now passed through, much of it to states, but some of it directly to a set of large cities like Houston, like San Francisco, like Chicago, there's an opportunity for municipalities to leverage this money for premium hazard pay. There are very few strings attached to these federal dollars. The only thing that they can't use it for is tax breaks, which, thank God, right? So it's really about people knowing that money is coming, and being able to, this is from ARP money, right? American, I don't know what it stands for, recovery, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to mess that up, but like, it's ARP money, and it's real. it's really important that we begin to petition our local mayors as well as our governors to get access to those funds for essential workers for premium hazard pay. Oh, wait,
Thank you.
I said I was going to also talk about corporations, Brandy. I'm sorry. And we also,
That's-
so Biden just like tried to, he's trying to push through like, this huge, $1 trillion plan, and which is amazing. And we also are going to ask for corporations to match that. So I'm a part of the Always Essential campaign, and I'll put the link to that campaign in the chat as well. But one of the big things we really want to move is that, this isn't just like our tax dollars helping us. We need corporations to put back in too. People like Jeff Bezos made upwards of $25 billion in the first 3 months of the pandemic alone. So we can literally point to the pandemic profiteers who made money off of our pain, and we need them to put that money back into the pot as well.
Thank you. Okay, this question is directed, thank you guys, for Hailey. Do some of Biden's proposals currently or other politicians' proposals currently give a good basis for further organizing like you did before? Like, is there a hot button issue? Especially they're asking about Biden. Is there something to push Biden for, or that you're pushing Biden for?
Yes, absolutely. As I kind of bounce from org to org and cause to cause as I find my place, but still wanting to remain very active, the PRO Act is very much on my mind. And I think just making noise and letting Biden and the other federal administration that's representing Arizona know that this is what we want and this is what we need, and to take away our right to protest and our right is a complete contradiction of the Constitution. It is so. With Biden specifically, there haven't been any like strategic that I'm aware of, strategic planning on going towards that, aside from letters with different orgs signing on and whatnot. But it is always on the front burner, high heat, as far as keeping the ability to continue to throw actions and throw them successfully so that they are effective and create sustainable change for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Okay, I'm on board with whatever we're doing, by the way. I'm going to pair these two questions because we may not have an answer for the first one. It's very specific, which we asked for. But we're told that nurses at Albany Medical Center recently organized. So there was a question on what that was all about. And Diane asked for a link to international labor struggles, some sort of association. I can think of a few that are in the world. What do you guys think?
Okay. On the, I don't have really specifics on the Albany struggle, so maybe someone else can answer that. But in terms of recognizing struggles in other countries and how they impact on us, I think if this pandemic did not illuminate that, people haven't been listening. So there are, organizations within this country that are working on recognizing the needs of workers in other countries, like what had been the International Labor Rights Fund, which is now merged with the Global Justice Fund, and I can give you a link there. They have been involved recently in promoting an action and I can't remember the name of the person who was killed, but they have connected a lot of the issues that are happening throughout the world, and not just with women, but there are quite a number where they have dealt with women too. So this is clearly an international struggle, and the pandemic is international. And even if we hopefully get up to herd immunity in this country, which is going to take a lot of effort, unless we have a lockdown in this country and people don't travel anywhere, it will not be eradicated. And we have an obligation, at least in my view, to be sharing the wealth and vaccines. And there shouldn't be such, so much evaluation on whether we should be doing this or not. So.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Carmella, if you would know this, but someone's inspired by what you're doing there in Chicago and asking for advice for the same in Florida.
Okay. Are you referring to the membership assistance program that our union put together? Just so you know, that was put together by directors and organizers and volunteers. And I've actually been volunteering there now a year, believe it or not. And we just got a group of people together. We went through the key leaders from each of the hotels and found out who was interested, who could help. And we just took everybody on. And the way we were able to communicate with our members was several ways. Through the telephone always works. That's the number one thing. And Facebook, through social media. And then we put together, I don't want to call it a television show. Well, maybe it is. Every 2 weeks, we have a program that we do on Facebook Live. It's called The Bullhorn. And that's how we get all the latest information out to our members. And we keep our members engaged in, all type of topics. And that's how we get them to come to actions to, fight for non-union hotel workers. That's how we get the information out to go and get vaccinated. As you all know, Chicago has a vaccination clinic for union members only, and union members work there for the union. So we get all type of information out. We've had doctors come on to talk to us about vaccination. So we've been able to just, really get this thing going. As a matter of fact, we just celebrated doing 31 episodes, and you can find that on Facebook on Unite Here Local 1. So it's really interesting, a lot of information, just a lot of information.
All right, does anyone have a question they saw that they wanted to answer? Can I turn it over to Roberta? I can also say there was more specific, she might not be ready. There was more specifics from Diane on the global issue. Says, on the international issue, I have filed complaints there myself. So I'm not asking what they are. I'm asking if this group is working with that. I myself couldn't understand that, but I'm putting it out there because I don't want to ignore a follow-up question.
I think there's a lot. I appreciate what Carol mentioned earlier in terms of the group Global Labor Justice, which merged with the International Labor Rights Forum, because I do think that there's a lot to be done in terms of how we collaborate on issues of organizing collective bargaining with multinational corporations, and do that in a way that also creates a firewall around, some of the smaller unions who are facing extreme repression by their governments. And that's certainly something that Carol was talking about in relationship to the woman who was killed by her employer in a fit of gender-based violence at work. I think that there's probably more to the question in terms of U.S. imperialism than we can answer as a panel. But I do think that there's a set of steps that the Biden administration can take to change the rules, as opposed to just setting policy and changing issues. And those things include, really paying attention to and how we fix the filibuster or get rid of it, dare I say, or how we make it easier for people to organize collective bargain, make it easier for people to vote. And I don't know that the administration themselves will be able to do all of it, but I do think that as a movement, we also have some real responsibility to center our struggles nationally and globally in that fight, to really think about how we're changing the rules to increase democracy and not just focusing on kind of specific narrow issues.
All right.
I am getting a last question. Are there any, it's to Hailey, but it can go to everyone. Are there any upcoming marches? Could there be around the COVID issue and related issues?
So right now, Phoenix, the main focus as far as marches, rallies, protests, what have you. Arizona is a very difficult state to organize and to protest, and it's a challenge, to say the least. Nevertheless, we persevere. But to answer the question, the main focuses have been abolishing the filibuster, or at least, in the very least, stopping it, and then going on to the PRO Act and PEVL, things centered around voter rights and voter suppression, as opposed. ASU did a phenomenal job of distributing vaccines in unbelievable numbers. Not to say that this isn't still a rampant issue, just specifically in Arizona, the marches, rallies, etc., are not COVID focused. They are, obviously the topic is touched on, but they're not COVID centered.
So let me help wrap this up. I'd like to have a lightning round here with our panelists. So sorry, didn't give you any warning, but what do you think, what in the coming year, what are you going to be focusing your energies on, and specifically what legislation do you think we need, but what are you going to be thinking is the most important thing for women in coming out of this pandemic catastrophe? Why don't I start with Carol?
Thank you. So I think that, I think the most important thing is the right to vote. Without that, we have a Congress that we can't depend on, a president that we can't depend on, or that is trying to undo our democracy and our ability to really make change, although voting is not the only way, but it's a very basic way. So I think that that would be key. I can add another list in addition, but I think that's critical.
Well, I think we're going to make a list here. So right to vote, number one. Hailey, what do you think?
Right now, my energy is so focused on House Bill 2668, which would just further criminalize homelessness, and just make it
the
even.
Arizona bill. This is a bill. This is a bill in the Arizona legislature. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so that would be something that I would continue to focus my energies on, as well as my work with Jobs with Justice, and possibly developing a coalition in Phoenix as opposed to Tucson, but immediately, because the cycle needs to be ended, and so that we can get folks off the streets, sheltered, and working again and feeling fulfilled, making money and being able to provide for themselves and their loved ones
All
and their
right.
community.
So we got 1, voting rights, 2, dealing with homelessness. What do you say, Carmella?
I have to jump on again about the voting rights because it was so important. And I think this year, well, not this year, in the last election, we had a lot of first-time voters. And I'm really grateful that people listened and they actually went to vote because now they actually feel the difference. So I will definitely be focusing on voting rights and getting laws changed in Illinois for the unemployment benefits has been one of my biggest things that's just got me staying up late at night, waking up early in the morning. It has to be changed. It's ridiculous the way that they have that agency set up, and it has to be reformed, and it has to be reformed as of yesterday.
All right, I vote for that. So now we got 2 votes for voting rights, 1 for homelessness addressing, and another one for the whole unemployment system. And I just have to put my 2 cents in here. Most people don't know this, but only a quarter of unemployed people actually get unemployment compensation. The vast majority do not get it. The whole system does not work. I know people on this call who aren't getting unemployment, who should be. And so let me move on finally to Smiley. And Smiley, was so nice to see your baby. We have to have a Zoom call in order to share our family stories. But anyway,
She Zoom bombed me.
all right. So Smiley, what is your priority in the coming year on struggle and in legislation?
I'm going to cheat a little bit because I agree with what's been said. And of course, I have to say the PRO Act and the other labor bills. But here's the thing. I want to support anything that will ultimately change the rules to make it easier for us to fight in the coming years. So that's infrastructure so that we can work and participate in civic engagement. I'm in. If that's things that makes it easier for us to vote, I'm in. If it's anything that makes it easier to organize and collectively bargain, count me in. That's where we need to be.
All right. Well, what a great way to wrap up. Voting rights, take care of the homeless, reform unemployment system, pass the PRO Act, and change the rules so that workers have more power. This is the women's agenda for the coming year, and I'm so glad to be part of that with all of you. Thanks everybody for participating. And on behalf of People's World and International Labor Communicators, People Before Profits Education Fund, have a wonderful rest of your May Day weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Great job, everybody.
Great job, you guys.
Thank you so much for having me on.
No doubt.
Thank
No
you
doubt.
so
It's great to meet you, Carmella.
Nice to meet you too.
Fantastic stuff.
Amazing.
Finally, wonderful to meet you. Brandy, good to see you as always. And
meet you.
Carmella, wonderful meeting you. Carrie, we need to have another hour-long discussion another night. So I'll email you and we'll talk. It will have another history lesson.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we should have a debrief.
Yeah, well, I think, Carrie, we can stop the meeting now and thank everybody who attended.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.